All right, so what we're talking about. So this particular lecture, and usually I would just say today, but this is going to be broken over 2 days. I'm going to try to make a sale to you. I'm going to try to sell you something. And what I'm going to try to sell you is about the wisdom of markets, right? So we've been talking about supply and demand being one way that markets run when we're talking about a competitive market. And we've talked about efficiency, the use of resources, the allocation of resources, and things like that. So there's a lot of wrinkles in the real world that make the competitive market not always apply as the sort of thing that's going on. But what I'm going to try to do in this particular lecture is make the strongest case to you that I can that when you do have a competitive market, it's going to do some good things, and you should probably let it do its thing. Right? Now, we're going to walk that back a little bit after midterm 1. We're going to talk about some caveats where the real world comes in and makes that not always the case. But for this, I'm just going to show you as strong cases I can make for it, right? And so that the idea being that when we start to break those things down, we at least know what we're working relative to. Okay. So we've only got so much stuff. That is a truism in the world. And for most things, the amount that we want to have of that stuff outpaces what is available. Right? We want more stuff than there is for pretty much everything. Now, for every scarce good, for which there's a limit on how much, there has to be some way of deciding who gets the stuff. Okay? Now, this is a problem you can't really get around, at least until we invent replicators and we're in Star Trek, right? So you have to have some way of allocating the stuff. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. You can have some person or agency deciding who gets what. You can have people fighting each other, and whoever wins the fight gets to have the stuff. You can require people to do some sort of hoop jumping. People who are willing to jump through the hoops, even if it doesn't do anything useful, they're the ones who get the stuff. So like an example of that would be like if you want to get a ticket to a sold out show, the person who's willing to wait the longest in line and get there first, they get the ticket. They didn't do anything useful with that waiting time, but we've decided that by jumping through that hoop, you're the one who gets the ticket. Right? Or you can have a market where people exchange and sell things to each other. And so if you have a limited amount of a resource, there has to be some way of deciding who it is that gets the stuff. And so it's important when you're comparing this sort of stuff to understand how these different systems operate, when they work well, and when they fail. That's what we're going to be doing in this particular lecture. So a couple of important points as we go into this. First one is that we're going to be talking about competitive markets. Remember, competitive markets are where you have so much competition between the sellers, and there's so many different buyers that nobody really has control over the market. Nobody can set their own prices, right? We're not talking about a situation, like the Daraprim guy, where he has complete control over the entire market to do whatever he wants, right? There's lots of competition. This is not the same thing as a free market. Often when you hear arguments about letting markets do their thing, it is in the context of a free market, which just means that the government gets out of the way. That's not the same thing as a competitive market, which is what we're talking about here. Some markets are competitive and free. Some markets are competitive and very much not free. The stock market is highly competitive and also highly regulated. There are some markets that are free and not competitive, right? Most monopolies that are allowed to operate are not monopolies because they're regulated. They're just not competitive markets. And then, so there's not the same thing, right? There's some overlap there, but they're not the same thing. Next, we're trying to describe the world, which is not the same thing as trying to say how the world should be. So the goal here is to talk about what will be the effects of distributing the stuff in a particular way, which you could then combine with ethical principles to decide what it is that should actually be done in any particular scenario. And then finally, we're going to be talking a lot about efficiency and the efficient use of resources, which is not necessarily the same thing, again, as good, right? There is a gap between what is the efficient use of resources and what is an ethical use of resources, and we're going to leave that to another day. So the goal is here to think about what will be the implications of choosing to allocate goods in a particular way, and then later you can ask, do I like those implications or not? Okay, so markets. Markets are a system that allocates goods. It is one of the things that they do. They don't just allocate goods, they also allocate tasks. Who is it that's going to create the stuff? How much stuff is going to get made, and then once we have it, where does it go? Typically, if we're talking about competitive markets, it does so according to the model of supply and demand. And so I'm going to make the case for why we think that these competitive markets are going to make an efficient use of resources, that we're going to be able to get a lot more out of the scarce stuff that we have. Also, I'm going to talk about how markets guide the allocation of resources and goods in society. So let's take a quick example to start. Talk about snow shovels. So let's say that a hardware store has been selling snow shovels for $30. Okay. Now, then the morning after a large snowstorm, they wake up in the morning, they look outside, 2 feet of snow. It's way more than there's been for a long time. Sort of like this past winter where it snowed way more than it has for the past few years before that. Right? They wake up, they run to the store, they cross out the $30 and they write in 45. So what I'd like you to do is to rate this action. Would you consider this to be completely fair, an acceptable thing to do, unfair, or very unfair? So think about that for yourself. All right, so do you think this is a completely fair thing to do? 1. Raise your hand for acceptable. Number 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. How about 3? So unfair, 1, 2, and very unfair. No. All right. So I can tell you, this is pretty commonly what I would get as a response to this question. It's a very business school-y kind of response. People in general do not like this as a thing that you can do. This is what a lot of people would refer to as price gouging, right? In a 1986 survey and replicated in a number of other surveys with general populations, you get something like 82% of respondents choosing one of these last 2 options, right? Now let's think about what implication this might have, right? So you wake up in the morning, you look outside, you see the price of that snow is 2 feet deep. Everyone's going to want a snow shovel, and you think, well, maybe I should run to the store and up the price on snow shovels. I know people are going to really want them. They'll probably pay a lot for them, but I'm worried that 82% of my customers are going to hate me the next day, and maybe they're not going to come back to shop next time, right? So if that's the thought in your head, as a person who is choosing what to do with the price, you might choose not to raise the price of snow shovels and instead keep them at the original $30, right? There's sort of a restriction on your ability to compete on price. So if this is going to happen, sellers are not going to want to raise their prices in this situation because people are going to be mad at them and not shop there later. And so what's going to happen in that case? Well, what has just happened with the snowstorm? What's that going to do to the market for snow shovels? So let's first ask, is this snowstorm going to affect demand or supply? Raise your hand if it's going to affect demand. It could be both. Hands for demand, raise your hand if it's going to affect supply. All right, so yeah, demand. People wake up, there's a snowstorm, people need snow shovels. Demand has increased for snow shovels. This is going to increase the equilibrium price of snow shovels, the price at which the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. Do I have this on this? Okay. Supply, demand. Before, we had an equilibrium price of 30. Now demand has shifted. The equilibrium price perhaps would be 45. But if we woke it up in the morning and said, I don't want to change my price, people will hate me, we might stay at 30. Now we know what's going to happen if we stay at 30, right? What's going to be the outcome in the market if we end up with a price of 30, even though the equilibrium has risen to 45? What's going to result out of that? Yeah, yes. Yeah. We're going to run out of snow shovels, right? Here is the quantity supplied of snow shovels, and over here is the quantity demanded. People are going to show up and be like, oh, good, $30 still, I'll buy one. But we're going to run out, and there are going to be much more people, an excess demand. There's going to be people coming in your store after you run out of snow shovels, and they're like, where are all the snow shovels? I need one so bad. And you're like, well, I sold them all already. Sorry, we're out. And there's not really going to be an incentive to like rush in a bunch more because you already sold all the ones that you wanted to sell at a price of $30. If you wanted to sell more at $30, you would have had more already. So we're going to end up with an excess demand because we've refused to raise the prices.